It is Sunday in England in 1388. Work has stopped. 2 dice wait. Free means the work stopped. It doesn't mean the hour belongs to you. You reach for one. The gesture still feels familiar. Work stops, and a hand reaches for a game. Then the king's law enters the room. Servants and laborers should own bows and arrows. On Sundays and holy days they should use them, leaving dice, football, and other troublesome games alone. Your hand is still above the table. The die is beneath it, but the hour has already been claimed for something else. That's what makes medieval free time so strange. The question isn't simply what workers did when they weren't working. We know they had games, drink, music, conversation, festivals, and physical contests. The deeper question is who was allowed to decide what a free hour was for. The law of 1388 gives us the fuller, remarkable list. It names tennis and football, quoits and dice, throwing stones, and a bowling game called cales. A law isn't a photograph. It can't show us every village green, and it certainly can't prove that everyone obeyed, but it does show what worried the people writing it. These weren't imaginary distractions. They were competing uses of workers' time. Dice made an especially compact rival. They were small, required less equipment than an elaborate board, and could turn almost any flat surface into a game. They could also turn a friendly pause into a wager. One tiny English seal from the 14th century captures that world better than a sermon does. It shows a hound and a hare facing each other over a board playing dice. Around them runs a joke. Hazard, your hood is mine. The stake is not a castle or a chest of silver. It is clothing. Someone has lost the thing covering his head. The players are animals, but the joke only works because the audience understands the scene. A throw, a loss, a hood changing hands. In 16 millimeters of copper alloy, leisure has become risk, status, humor, and a story worth putting on a personal seal. The law points toward a more physical world as well. Football could pull a crowd into a shared contest. Quoits, stone throwing, and cales turned accuracy or strength into a challenge. We should not imagine standardized rules or identical play in every town. The list preserves something simpler. Authorities were choosing one approved recreation over a field of rival pleasures. Literature places the same object in a louder room. In Chaucer's Pardoner's Tale, young men gather around taverns, gambling, dancing, eating, drinking, and listening to harps and stringed instruments. Chaucer is moralizing. He wants the tavern to look dangerous, so his story is not a neutral survey of nightlife. But the details reveal a recognizable cultural package. Dice did not sit alone. They belonged to noise, company, music, boasting, hunger, and the possibility of a fight. Across the channel, a French health manual made around 1265 placed 2 dice players directly below a sleeping figure in its chapter on sleeping and waking. On the next page, the subject is work and rest. One figure pauses while another chops a log. This is not evidence that every English laborer followed medical advice. It is something more modest and more useful. Medieval writers could treat waking, playing, working, resting, music, and emotion as connected parts of bodily life. A Castilian book completed in 1283 widens the comparison. Alfonso X's Book of Games presents chess as reason, dice as fortune, and tables as a mixture of both. Its images include players from different social and religious backgrounds. It cannot reconstruct an English worker's home, but it warns us not to treat gaming as one exclusively elite habit. So workers did not need a modern theory of boredom before they could want relief, company, excitement, or a chance to win somebody's hood. The urge to play is easy to see. Finding the time to play is harder. Much of that time was shaped by the religious calendar. Sundays and important feast days placed limits on ordinary labor. This didn't create a modern weekend, and the number of observed days varied by place, period, occupation, and necessity. Animals still needed care. Food still had to be prepared. Seasonal work couldn't always wait. Domestic labor didn't vanish merely because a bell rang, nor was a holy day designed as private leisure. Worship, processions, communal expectations, and household duties could occupy it. The important distinction is that ordinary production was supposed to pause. That interruption created opportunities without guaranteeing personal control. A worker might gain time away from one task only to enter another obligation. Even celebration was usually social rather than private. The parish, household, neighbors, and local custom helped determine where people gathered and what behavior would be tolerated. Yet the restriction could matter. Church law said masters should allow servants to abstain from ordinary work and attend worship, and this wasn't confined to advice books. Ecclesiastical courts sometimes prosecuted masters who forced dependents to work or prevented them from going to church. In Salisbury in 1394, a church visitation cited named servants for working on holy days. It also cited masters for working and compelling their servants to do the same. The court treated the scene as two possible offenses. The subordinate had worked and the superior had applied pressure. This is where a story about medieval games becomes a story about power. We have answered what workers might do with a pause. The stronger question is who could claim that pause before the worker did. Other courts drew the line differently. Records from some jurisdictions tended to blame both master and servant. Others concentrated on the person giving the order. Wives and children could appear inside the same problem because they, too, lived under a household authority that could command their labor. That last point matters because the phrase medieval worker can quietly turn into medieval man. A woman might work for wages or perform household labor that didn't disappear when field or workshop labor paused. The records don't give us a stopwatch for her free time. They do show why a day without ordinary production wasn't automatically a day of equal leisure for everyone in the household. This is the first reversal. A rule that limited what people could do on a holy day could also protect a worker from being made to work. Religious control and practical protection were not opposites. They could be produced by the same rule. But protection from work was not the same thing as ownership of time. In 1443, an English common law argument pushed in the other direction. It held that a servant remained in the master's service even on a holy day. Even when the servant went to church to serve God, he was still considered to be in the temporal Lord's service. Think about the conflict hidden inside that sentence. The church bell says ordinary work should stop. An ecclesiastical judge may punish a master who ignores it. Yet another legal authority can still imagine the servant as permanently within the master's command. The body has left the workplace. The relationship has not. A free hour was not an empty box waiting to be filled. It was a contested space. The church might define it as sacred. A master might see labor still available. A household might fill it with necessary tasks. A community might turn it into a feast or a match. And the crown might look at the same hour and see an archer who was not practicing. The bow did not appear from nowhere in 1388. In 1363, Edward III had already ordered able-bodied men to practice archery on holidays and pushed other games aside. The reason was practical. Skilled archery required repetition. A government could demand bows, but it could not instantly manufacture practiced archers when war began. Training had to happen somewhere in the calendar. So the crown looked at days when ordinary work paused and treated them as a reserve of military preparation. To the player, football or dice might be recreation. To the government, they competed with the hours needed to keep people practiced with the war bow. The modern phrase would be mandatory training on a day off. But this wasn't a workplace seminar. It was preparation for war. That changes the meaning of the interrupted game. The bow is not merely another pastime displacing a forbidden one. It is an institution reaching into leisure and asking that the worker's body remain useful even while his ordinary tools are down. The timing matters. England, after the Black Death, was already trying to control labor more aggressively. The Statute of Laborers of 1351 attempted to restrain rising wages and limit movement. It also required able-bodied people without independent means to accept work and tried to stop employers from poaching servants with better offers. Then the 1388 measure addressed weapons and recreation while speaking directly to servants, agricultural laborers, artisans, food sellers, and innkeepers. These laws didn't create one perfectly coordinated system. They answered different problems and enforcement varied. But placed together, they expose a consistent anxiety. Authorities didn't regard the workers' labor, movement, equipment, or spare time as entirely private matters. This doesn't mean workers possess no leisure. In fact, the laws make no sense unless people continued to prefer other games. Commands had to be renewed. Football survived. Dice survived. Taverns didn't become silent rooms full of abandoned tables. A prohibition records an attempt to control behavior, not the disappearance of that behavior. And people did more than resist in dramatic ways. Most autonomy probably appeared in small negotiations, a game after worship, a wager before supper, or music after the day's necessary work. It could be a match tolerated by neighbors, a master looking away, or an official unable or unwilling to police every green and table. We can't reconstruct one typical Sunday for every medieval worker. Rural laborers, urban artisans, apprentices, women managing household work, hired servants, and the independently prosperous didn't carry the same obligations. England wasn't France or Castile, and 1350 wasn't 1450. The safe conclusion is narrower but more revealing. Medieval workers could have recognizable forms of leisure. What they often lacked was an uncontested right to define that leisure for themselves. Return to the table. Your tool is down, the die is up. You roll it, and for a moment the result belongs to chance rather than to your master, your parish, or your king. Perhaps you win a hood. Perhaps you lose your own. Perhaps someone reminds you that you should be at the archery butts. The die began as a way to fill a pause. It became a stake between friends, a danger in a moral tale, a rival to military training, and finally evidence of something larger. The worker wasn't fighting for a modern vacation. He was doing something smaller and more immediate, trying to make one interrupted hour feel like his. That is why a medieval worker's free time was not really free. The work could stop while obligation continued. The bell, the household, the court, and the crown could all reach into the pause, and that makes the final throw matter. Not because the game changed the world, but because for the few seconds that the die was in the air, nobody else had decided how it would land.